This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, I hope you can hear me well. Good, thank you very much. Dear participants from many regions and many time zones, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the first round of information webinars in preparation of SOFTA 24. This is the fourth, actually, of the first round of briefing sessions, in particularly dedicated to item 3 of our agenda on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. As you know, this issue attracts a lot of attention and the high interest to consider draft documentation as early as possible. In this regard, Substa Bureau, with the Secretariat and co-chairs of the open-ended working group, decide to use an opportunity of Substa 22 meeting being postponed due COVID-19 to use this time to develop higher quality documents and allow parties and stakeholders to be better prepared for discussions at Substa meeting. I hope all of you are fine and healthy under these difficult constraints due to COVID-19. Well, this will hopefully allow for better and more specific advice to the third meeting of the open-ended working group. The draft documents for peer review were posted last week at the website site, and the Secretariat issued a notification inviting the peer review. There are 3 documents already on the peer review section, if you visit there, that are totally connect with this agenda item. Many thanks to the open-ended working group co-chairs for the hard work in preparing elements for Substa documents and working closely with Substa chair to design these information webinars. This is our 4th try, our 4th occasion on this particular point. And I want to express also my appreciation to the Secretariat, in particular to Sasha and team, for preparing documents for the peer review and the organization of these meetings. And now, how are we going to organize today's meeting? Now, may I see next slide, please? Among myself, the open-ended working group co-chairs, and the secretary, we will cover the following topics. After session 1, we will have a first question and answer for 15 minutes. I invite you to write your questions on the chat. And if there are some people on the phone, we can try it. It's not been the occasion in the last 3 times, but I will check. So I invite you to use the chat to conduct the questions. After session 2A, we will have the second question and answer for 15 minutes, followed by a 5 minutes break. Then session 2B is divided in 2 parts, one on monitoring framework and the second on information documents. And after the monitoring framework, we will have another question and answer session. And the last session will be followed by the 4th and the last questions and answer 15 minutes slot. So you will have 4 opportunities to write your questions. And the following sessions will be recorded, and one of them will be available at the Substa 24 website. I understand that there is also, in addition to members of this GoToMeeting system, that it will be a YouTube through a link coverage of this 4th webinar. With this, I am happy to give the floor to the co-chairs of the open-ended working group to provide you with a general update on post-2020 process. So Basil and Francis, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Substa Chair. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Francis here. I'll take on some slides and then hand over to Substa Chair, and I think from there again, it will be co-chair to continue, and then Secretariat at some point also will come in, and finally we finish the slides. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So we are going to be looking at the post-2020 process and the guidance that was given to Substa, what they should consider at its 24th meeting, as well as what SBI3 also should be doing. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, before we could go to find out what mandate was given to Substar and SBI3, let me first say that all of us now, I think we have come to terms and also accept that the situation actually has changed quite dramatically since we had the first meeting, maybe the opening working group in that was way back in August in 2019, and perhaps the last one that happened in February this year. Actually, that one alone, as most of you know, happened already when COVID had just started spreading. And so we are grateful that we managed to finish that meeting because the challenging time had already started setting in. And so now, as we all know, the situation is still very uncertain. Um, this virus, we do not know how it is perhaps going even to phase out. You keep hearing of countries today they have opened up, the next day they are again back into lockdown. So even the events are differing also, even geographically. So that makes our planned face-to-face meetings, very, very difficult. And as you're going to see, we have had to postpone almost all of them, if not all of them, that had been planned beginning May up to now. So COVID has really taught us something here that we needed to keep adapting and even readapt as the situation emerges, but also to make use of available technology. Like now we are meeting not directly face to face, but we are making use of technology to see how we can continue working. And I have to say that for us as co-chairs and with support from the Secretariat and the chair of SAPSA and SBI, since we came back from Rome, we have continued to work to make progress using this very technology that we're using today. And so that's why we thought we needed to take that process even now to the next level with you people. So let's go to the next slide. So from the second meeting of the open-ended working group, there were recommendations that came to Substar to undertake as far as post-2020 is concerned. And I have to say from the beginning here that Substar itself is not going to do negotiation of the global biodiversity framework, but rather that will happen or that will be done by the open-ended working group. So the recommendation to Substar from the meeting we had in Rome was that Substar should focus on the technical and scientific review and analysis, looking at the components of those goals and targets, completeness and overlaps, advice on the numerical values. We've had this, especially for the quantitative targets, advice on attributes of goals and targets, the indicators, and also links to the SDGs, which you are going to hear among the things that we have already done. So availability of baseline data, at what period of time do we begin considering this as baseline? But also there are several other agenda items, of course, that are still relevant to the post-2020 for under SAPSA 24. And one of those includes health. And we now know with the COVID that health has become one of those issues globally that could help us to really make the case even much stronger for biodiversity and therefore the framework. Let's go to the next slide. So for SBI, again, no negotiation will also happen there of the framework, just like at Substar. But the open-ended working group at its second meeting recommended that SBI3 should provide elements to the development of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, in particular with those regard to support and review implementation, including the implementation support mechanisms. And of course, enabling conditions are also one of those critical areas: responsibility, transparency, outreach, and awareness. So that is the main task that the second meeting of the working group recommended for SBI to undertake at its third meeting. And for this SBI3, the agenda item that will focus more or will focus specifically on post-2020 is agenda item 5, And we also know, of course, that there are other broader things on the post-2020, including biosafety, access and benefit sharing. But just like SABSTA, there are many agenda items under SBI 3 that are also going to be or are very relevant to the post-2020, and they actually talk to the other broader mandate that was given, which I've just mentioned above. So agenda item 6 on resource mobilization and financial mechanism, capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management, communication, cooperation. Agenda item 9 on mechanism for reporting, assessment and review, and agenda item 11 on mainstreaming. So when you read that, they speak to the other broader mandate that was given by the open-ended working group at the second meeting. So, but no, those specific agenda items will also come up with recommendations that actually concerns post-2020. So what will happen there among those main agenda items 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, the recommendations there that touch post-2020 will then be taken to agenda item 5 so that we come up with one piece of document from SBI 3 that actually concerns post-2020. So let's go to the next slide. So what are some of the processes that are still remaining as we work our way towards COP15? Of course, as we've just been telling you and you'll be seeing in other slides that follow, so there are still some thematic consultations as well as meeting of the open-ended working group that will still happen. So we have got SBI 3 that will sit and provide advice to the open-ended working group for consideration. Then we will, of course, update the framework upon us conclusively holding the second meeting of the open-ended working group. And the framework that will come now will have, of course, sections E to H. That is more or less concerns the other mandate I told you was given to SBI 3. So all these will be reflected, the above will be reflected in those key elements of the global biodiversity framework in the main text, but also the details could be presented as annexes. And then, of course, we shall come up with some relevant decisions that will be taken to COP15. Let's go to the next slide. So the next slide touches on what I was already talking of earlier, and that is how our timeframes, of course, have kept changing. But as you heard from SBSTTA Chair, already there are documents posted on the website for peer review. And this has been posted about 25th of June, and it will run up to around 25th of July. So those documents include the table, which has got the 2050 goals, the 2030 milestones. This time, taking on board what we had from Rome, we had to bring on board the milestones, and those milestones, you are going to see that they are mainly focusing on actually the goals. Then you have the 2030 targets or the action targets and monitoring elements and indicators, baseline, as well as annotations and the SDG linkages. So with the annotations, that is where you're going to find our proposal on the use of certain terms. No, they are not definitions per se, but they are actually some way we feel we understand certain words and how we like to use them in the framework. And so after the peer review, we will then be able to still do further work and now come up with documents. And those documents could include the complete draft of the goals, milestone targets, as well as sections E to H. So those, of course, we take on board what has come from the peer review, but also review of other SBSTTA documents, the annotations, the SDG linkages, all those will now be made available. But also we expect to have some webinars in September around there. So this will be on the GBO5, the launch of the GBO5 likely to take place, through webinar now this time around. It's not very easy with the current situation, but also we have the review mechanisms, resource mobilization, and then from there we should be able to complete this draft and make it available at least 6 weeks before the meeting of substance. So the tentative date, you will know that it has been communicated. Again, that is still also under review. But there are those other thematic consultations remaining, the one on synergies, the one on access and benefit sharing. Those could still take place as well. And so that we are more complete with the consultation. So after then we have had input from Substa, and we have done adequate revision of the whole exercise, including, of course, what has also come out from SBI 3. Then we should be able to prepare draft 1.0. And this is the one that then goes to the third meeting of the working group. This is in Cali. Again, the time is changing, but is next year. You will be, of course, be informed about that. With the current situation, it's very, very difficult to know whether even a proposed timeline will remain, as proposed. But we have got the role to keep trying to put those timelines and hope that it goes as planned. And after the third meeting of the working group, we prepare the final draft and also make it available in time prior to the COP15 meeting, where it will be tabled for consideration and approval. So that is basically in terms of time frame that is before us. But we'd like to thank everybody that we have made progress since we started way back in January 2019. Really, it is gratifying to see where we are today, despite the situation we are in. So let's go to the next slide. So this was almost what I was communicating in the table, the previous slide, that we are still going to have the second meeting, Bantu, that is focusing on the MEAs and their contributions to the framework. How are they going to report? How are they going to take their considerations, things like the targets and so forth, or the indicators? How is it going to fit within what we're doing? Then sustainable use, thematic consultation, this will still happen. Talked about the one on ABS, and then of course the meeting of Substan and SBI 3, and also we have the DSI process. All those are still planned to happen, and then we have the third meeting of the working group, and then head to COP together with its high-level segment. But of course, there are things going to happen between now, even up to the time we go through those other planned activities. There are those for which the date seems to be fixed now. We have the UN high-level political forum is going to take place this month. Then you have got the IMF and the World Bank meetings. These have shown a lot of interest in the post-2020. And then the UN Biodiversity Summit of Heads of State, September. This was initially supposed to be face-to-face, but what we now hear is that it's also likely to be now online. So COVID is definitely changing the landscape in so many ways. Then the IOCN World Congress meeting going to take place January, and the date is there for now, 2nd to 5th January 2021. We hope and pray that it can take place as planned. Then G7 and G20 meetings. So that is the other actions that will happen perhaps before we head to COP 15. The next slide. So the next piece of document that we are going to issue ahead of the third meeting of the working group, that is document 1.0, the one I've just been talking about. You may be wanting to know, or could wish to know, what will that document have taken on board? What will it be mainly reflecting? So what you see on screen there is what is going to be considered or is being considered by the co-chairs even now as they continue to work with the Secretariat, SBI chair and Substa chair. That is the outcomes from the first meeting of the working group, second meeting of the working group. We will reflect and take into account the outcomes of the meeting of the working group on Article 8J, Substa 23rd, Substa 24th, again, SBI 3. And then, of course, the written submissions that were submitted up to 24th Feb 2020. And we shall also reflect on the outcomes of thematic consultation. We have had a number of them. And again, there are still those which I've just told you are still coming up. So that is broadly what we as co-chair, the support from the Secretariat, SBSTTA chair and SBI chair, that is what we expect the 1-0 to really take on board. Not very easy to do. There's lots and lots of information coming from these processes, but we'll try our best to make sure that we take on board the guidance or the information that has been provided, because everybody will have really given their thoughts in all these meetings to make this framework a better one. So let's go to the next slide. I think with that, it means I have to hand over back to SBSTTA chair. Over to you.
Thank you very much, co-chair Francis Lowell. With this, we have a slot of 15 minutes to respond to questions you may have. I invite you to write on the chat your questions. There is a mention from Sonia Peña from IUCN about the World Conservation Congress next January. It was in one of the slides, considering from 2 to 15, and Sonia mentioned from 7 to 15. I guess it's 2 weeks for other internal meetings of IUCN. Thank you for the reminder. Then Dilys Rowe, can you clarify if the peer review process of SBSTTA docs will also fit into draft 1.0? Yes, of course. These peer review documents we will explain later during presentation, but this will turn into documents for SBSTTA, and SBSTTA as well as SBI will provide inputs, including the thematic consultations to co-chairs for them to write draft 1.0 before the meeting in Cali. Yes, also Vasil mentioned about that. And there are more questions that you may want to put on the chat. We still have time for clarifications or questions. I think we're improving in the way we're presenting our stuff. Uku Skinner, a leaf from the UK. When all thematic workshops on sustainable use take place, I hope my colleagues from either Secretariat or co-chairs can answer that. We saw the chart, and this is scheduled at least, is the one on, it will be at least 3 thematic consultations this year, and sustainable use in principle is between July and August, but I will let my colleagues to respond. Let's take a package of questions before handing over to our colleagues. Are there any feedback from experts about digital sequence information? This is a question from Belat, Krista. And then Elena Paul. The current reviews look at indicators, but not the targets. Does it not seem to make sense? Also, many of the targets have been greatly weakened from the draft. But when is it possible to look at them again? I will let co-chairs to respond that. And Basil is also responding to digital sequence information experts. Workshop report is posted on the CBD website. Pia Norling. Will SBSTTA doc be updated with the input from the peer review before SBSTTA 24? Of course, documents on the peer review is the previous phase before turning into pre-session documents for SBSTTA works, either as pre-session or information documents. That's the intention of the peer review phase, to enhance the quality of the document before it goes to the formal work. Silvana Bustillo, how should input from CSOS, which I don't know what it means, be provided in order for them to be considered? If Silvana can spell out CSOS, civil society organization, I guess, in order for them to be considered. Of course, the peer review process is open to everybody. It's important to mention that the peer review intent is to enhance the quality of the documents, not to negotiate, not to put any position from any government, but to see the quality. And elements to improve the quality of documents can come from any stakeholder, civil society, the academy, governments, and it's the role of the secretariat to analyze them in order to include more references, to be more precise in information during the peer review process. And of course, it's been a number of notifications where secretariat is requesting from input from everybody and help with suggestions for co-chairs. Neth from ETC Group. If the travel situation will continue to be restricted in the coming months, do you have a plan B on the mode and format of SBSTA and the open-ended working group 3? Well, so far, SBSTA Bureau and Code Bureau are meeting virtually every month at least, analyzing the situation, and that is why SBSTA moved from May to August and from August to November. So we are analyzing the situation with the intention to keep the idea of a face-to-face. If anything changes, we will let you know, but we are assessing the situation. With this packet of questions, I hand over to co-chairs and secretariat to respond. So please, co-chairs.
Good day, everyone. This is Basil. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
A set of good questions. I'll try to group them and explain a little bit the mandate of the various groups and the various steps in the process. We've met, the open-ended working group met in Rome in February, and we had a discussion on draft 0. And then we, at the end of the meeting, we received a mandate from the open-ended working group, and that mandate was to prepare an updated version of the goals and targets for the use of SBSTA and SBI. So what you see in the document for peer review today is basically an update of the goals and targets that reflect the discussion in Rome and nothing else. Then SBSTA has a very important role in providing, and a very unique role in providing scientific and technical advice on those targets. And that includes, as Francis has mentioned, a number of items, including the review of the component for completeness and overlap, advice, and I will come later, advice on the numerical attribute of goals and targets, very important advice on indicators, availability of the data. So that's why at this point in time, the role of SBSTA is one, to provide guidance to the open-ended working group. And then the open-ended working group will take that guidance at their third meeting, and we'll do a negotiation of the actual language of goals and targets. So that's why the process is shaped that way. I realize that it is somewhat different from other process that some of you may be familiar with, but we feel that that is the classic process for CBD, and we feel that's a good way and a way to ensure that there is that independent expert advice coming from you at SBSTA. I think some of you have talked about the role of when the goals and target negotiation take place, so I answer that. I think I've answered pretty much everything. I won't touch on changing the plans for dates. I think Ezekiel, you did a good job at explaining that this is being reviewed month to month, and it's very useful to us to have a plan, even if we know that there is risk that that plan can change. Francis, do you want to add to what I just said?
Yeah, thank you, Coach. I just needed to add something, maybe in about 2 areas or so. Still on the issue of if the travel situation continues as is, so plan B and so forth for the meeting of the working group and substance. I think in addition to what already co-chair and the subsecretary has said, of course, the consultations we are having now is not going to replace the physical meetings. So the physical meetings still have to take place. And that's why we are really thinking of every time you see that's being revised, because the physical meetings will still take place. But this type of consultations we are having are very, very useful. Then I had also a comment, how are we going to review on the targets? That how will the peer review look at the indicators and not targets? I think we've said that we'd like SABSTA really to focus more on the scientific elements of its work when it meets, rather than looking at the targets themselves, because that would in many ways start the process of negotiation. If we say we go look at the targets or look at the goals, so that could easily start the process of negotiation, which we will not want to happen at that level. But you will see that progress will have been made in refining those goals and targets. Yet we would like you to appreciate them, but handle the review of those targets at the right time. That is when we have the third meeting of the working group. I think that is the other additional thing I wanted to add there. But maybe Secretariat, I hope if either Jyoti is there, the exact date perhaps for or Shasha for the sustainable use.
Thank you very much. Sasha, you have the floor to respond some questions.
Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So yes, I will probably add some couple of points. First of all, on consultations on sustainable use. So as you all know, we were planning for a physical meeting in March. It's obviously didn't happen. So we came with suggestion for alternative way to conduct this consultation. So it will take place in 3 phases. So the first one will be introductory webinar setting the scene and also the context for sustainable use. We plan to do it at the end of this month in July. Then we will issue a questionnaire with a number of questions for submissions and comments for the period of 1 month. And then we will have another webinar, online session late August, early September, just to go through the results and have a discussion. And then the report will be ready by the end of September, so that the reports from this consultation process may contribute both to SABSTA and SBI, but definitely submitted first of all to the third meeting of the open-ended working group. So on DSI, you saw the message from Basil that ARCTEC met a couple months ago. The report of ARCTEC is available. And you also know that based on the process set up in the decision of COP14 in relation to post-2020 process, the results of this discussion at the ARCTEC will be brought to the attention and consideration of the open-ended working group. So in terms of review of targets, I think that co-chairs already touched upon, but I like also to draw your attention that current draft of monitoring framework has a new element in the table, the components of goals and components of targets. And you are invited to comment on it. So you can use this opportunity to contribute to what needs to be covered by goals and targets. And maybe the last point, just to reiterate again that what you can see in front of you now is only draft. If you saw, those documents even have no chapeau. So because it's a draft documents, and the final press session and final information documents to be submitted to SBSTA and posted online on SBSTA website will be done only after this peer review and based on peer review. Thank you, Sekya. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Sasha and co-chairs. There's a final question here from Uku Skinner. Will elements of post-2020 global biodiversity framework related to biosafety and ABS be only discussed at SBI 3 or at SBSTA 24.2? I hope with the next segment of this webinar is going to be clear. SBSTA has a mandate to analyze mainly the scientific and technical elements of the updated goals and targets and look for indicators. So from that part, yes, or from the indicators part, but any negotiation on the goals and targets will be only at SBI, at the open-ended working group 3 meeting. But I will try to clarify SBSTA and SBI like different mandates. There are different bodies and with specific requests from the second meeting in Rome to work on elements. But all these pieces will be together by co-chairs in the 1.0 version. Sonia Peña from IUCN, could you clarify if that 1.0 of GBIF will refer again to the theory of change, the framework vision, mission alongside goals, milestones, and targets? I would say yes, but I can let co-chairs to respond to this. Yes, it's already a response. Thank you very much, Vasil, for responding. Since we have only 1 minute or less, I think with this, we can move on to the next slide, please, to continue with the second part, the second out of 4. Next slide, please. To continue with the second part on the overview of SBSTA 24 agenda, item 3, process and documents. As I said before, the organization on information sessions, next slide, please, Elizabeth. We have 2 phases. The first one on agenda item 3, post-2020, to facilitate the peer review process. We're closing today this period from June 30 to July 7 with 4 sessions based on time zones. Phase 2 on agenda items 4 to 10 will be later to see, well, the modalities will be agreed by SBSTA Bureau, and we are considering to do it by the end of August or early September. You should remember that the agenda of SBSTA 24 starts in agenda item 3 with post-2020, but we will have from 4 to 7 issues like biosafety, risk assessment, biodiversity on marine and coastal biodiversity. We also have agriculture, invasive species, health, Many of these documents are already posted on the website, but we will discuss them later. These four webinars on agenda item 3 is to explain very clearly how are we preparing and what will be the contribution of Substat to the process on post-2020. Other preparatory meetings in 6 languages, now is in English only, unfortunately, will be the launch of the Global Biodiversity Outlook 5 in September 15, and also a joint session with SBI and Substat for the introduction of updated post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in September 18 by co-chairs. So all this is in advance for SBI and Substat. Next slide, please. So it is very important to have clarity in what has been the mandate for Substat 24. We receive a mandate in Substat 23 to consider documents that identifies the range of relevant existing indicators, baselines, baseline dates, or other appropriate methods for monitoring changes in biodiversity, indicator gaps, and where relevant options for filling such gaps and for a monitoring framework. So this is the mandate we got last November. But also, beginning this year, at the end of February in Rome, we receive a specific mandate to carry out a scientific and technical review of updated goals and targets, related indicators and baselines, and revise appendices of the framework, and to provide advice. This is very important. We will provide advice to the working group at this 3rd meeting. So discussions from Rome, based on that, co-chairs made some changes and provide this information, and based on that, we're filling with additional information in the documentation for Substat relate to indicators and baselines. Of course, negotiations on the content of goals and targets will not be done neither in Substat or SBI. It will be done in the 3rd meeting of the open-ended working group. Next slide, please. So, the documents request to be available for Substat 24 will be the updated monitoring framework based on the outcomes of the meeting. So co-chairs will present these updated elements, and also update those elements of the draft post-2020 that were reviewed the open-ended working group, taking into account submissions received in response. So we will have the 2 elements, the new text, but also in addition with the monitoring framework, which is the documentation for Substat. And also it was a specific request to analyze linkages between the proposed goals and targets with the Sustainable Development Goals of the Agenda 2030 within the scope of the convention. So we're looking the connections, how post-2020 will contribute SDGs. Next slide, please. On the organization of the work on item 3 in Substat. As usually in negotiations in CBD, what we're going to have is first introduction of the updated goals and milestones and targets by the open-ended working group co-chairs in plenary in Substat. And then one of the bureau members of Substat will chair these plenary sessions for the first reading on pre-session documents. So we're going to have a specific document with an addendum, and we're going to be looking for delegates to have general reflection and specific comments to the draft recommendations and the monitoring framework. This is where we are going to know your views based on these documents, and due to this contingency, we have time for the peer review process to enhance the quality and to have very concrete comments on these recommendations. If needed, we're going to establish a contact group during that week to work into the allocate the different comments and the recommendations that Substack will give to the open-ended working group. Based on that, we're going to have a CRP document, the conference room paper for consideration based on the first reading and the contact group comments, to finish with the L document for consideration with the specific recommendations to the third meeting of the open-ended working group. This is our mandate. Then, if there is a contact group, this potential working contact group, we need to define the mandate, the modalities, and the co-chair assignment, which usually is one for developing country and another one for developed countries to conduct these usually night sessions. Next slide, please. So this is for how Substack is going to be working on that. Regarding the peer review process, it was a notification from the Secretariat, and we have now, if you go to the web page, of documents for Substack 24, you can also see a link to the peer review section. So we have 3 documents already. The one of the updated monitoring framework, which will turn into document 3 at 1. The one on information on indicators, and the one on linkages between SDGs and GBIF already. Remember that update goals and targets that are there is a new language provided by co-chairs, but are not for the peer review. So we'll look for the elements linked to them on indicators, on baselines, on availability of data. So document posted on the website on the peer review from June 25th until July 25th. So we still have days to receive your contributions, which are open to everybody. Next slide, please. So these are the linkages for notifications and the Substack peer review, and also the document on Substack 24. I invite also our colleagues from the Secretariat to copy these links in the chat so you can easily get to those documents. But if you are familiar with the web pages of the Secretariat, so you probably already know where these documents. Next slide, please. And with this, thank you, Joyce. It's already posted in the chat. So we go to the second session of questions and answers, if there are some in relation to elements just present. So please use the chat window. Actually, this time we have few callers using telephone line. If I don't see questions in the chat yet, maybe we can open the mics. If some of callers connect by voice, if they have questions, you can ask now for the floor to present your questions if you have some. We have 4 people at least as callers. If they want some, this is the time to do it. Meanwhile, Susana Villegas said, where can find the slides? Thank you. I understand that presentations will be available in the website, but I can ask our colleagues from Secretariat to respond. I prefer to see if there is a package of questions, then we can do it in Belat Quistat is asking to use the microphone. If you are able to write, I prefer if you can write your question. The microphone is open only for callers using only phone line. And I have caller 1, 01, 06, 11, and 12. Since they cannot write questions, this is the only opportunity to use the voice. Amber Schultz, in the zero draft where ABS indicators such as number of research collaborations, number of research outputs, these are not in the new documents. Have these disappeared or they are simply gone because they are assumed not to have baseline data? It was not clear to me in the document description. I hope our colleagues from the Secretariat can respond, and we will have a more detailed presentation on the documents. Remember, there are at least two documents. One is the general one, which is going to turn into addendum 1, and also a more detailed one prepared by WCMC with this compilation. But thank you for the pointing that. Torbjörn Ebenhard from Sweden. The goals and targets are not open for comments during peer review, but the components of goals and targets, column A, are open for views as I understand it. Does that mean that we can suggest additional components? We can provide advice to co-chairs, but I will let co-chairs to respond. Elena Kreuzberg, what are the functions of potential contact groups? Does it provide support to the process of peer review? Contact groups are created during the meeting of SBSTA. Peer review is open from 25th June to 25th July. After peer review process, this will turn into documents for SBSTA. So we're talking about different things. Contact group will be open during the meeting, face-to-face in SBSTA to resolve particular issues during the work of SBSTA. Vasily responding, yes, you can suggest new components if you feel free, and it's a gap between goals and proposed component. Good. Gadir, dear friend, it is still confusing for many civil society organizations that the goals and targets are not open for peer review. No, they are not. The language of goals and targets are not open to negotiations. We've been asked to work with the elements attached to them, relate to indicators, to baselines, components, and so on. It is understandable that we are not for negotiations per se, as that is the role of the open-ended working group. But SBSTA should provide scientific technical advice to them. Yes, we can do that during SBSTA debates. Also, would like to know if any party has made comments on the process. Well, Secretariat can respond. It's been not only one notification to receive comments on the framework, and this is usually a summary indicating how many parties, how many stakeholders provide comments to the process. This so we are avoiding having long discussions in the process during SBSTA instead of focusing on the content. With this, I will turn to co-chairs to respond some of these questions, and also the Secretariat. Co-chairs, you have the floor.
Thank you. And I'll respond to Gadir first. And yes, Gadir, you're right. There is SBSTA has an important role to provide technical and scientific advice. The process you see here is one that allows SBSTA to provide its scientific and technical advice on the framework by looking at the components for completeness or precision or gaps, etc., and looking at the indicators without getting into a negotiation process. So in a sense, I am quite envious of the role of Ezekiel, because he will have to preside over a group of experts having a technical review, and Francis and I will have to preside over a negotiation assembly that will be looking at every words, and then sometimes that is very different. So we feel that there is a very a very useful and important role, and that the way we've shaped that process enable you to carry that role without stepping into the business of changing this word for this other word, etc. So I hope that is satisfactory. I know that there is, I see a few more questions, but I'll let Ezekiel manage the few questions, and I'll pass the floor to Francis.
Yeah, thank you. I think basically you've explained. I may not have to repeat now that, but of course we expected perhaps that this kind of comments would be coming in, whether or not people should comment on. But I think giving can at least clarify what we expect exactly to happen at Substa. I see there is a question here.
Francis, we are having problems.
Thank you for the excellent presentation. To clarify, what you see in, you can't hear me?
Unfortunately, we cannot hear
me
you well.
Oh,
I hope we can get the line. Can you try again? And I will let you know if we can hear you to continue. Can you repeat what you just said?
I was saying that we have had a number of stakeholders today talking about whether or not goals and targets could be, be a subject of discussion at SAPSA or at peer review. So we expected that maybe this was something that we needed to clarify, and I think we have clarified, saying that let SAPSA really concentrate on the scientific and technical review work, and we leave that to the open-ended working group to do the negotiation on those goals and targets. Now, there is a question here. Are you hearing me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Yeah, there is a question here that are the bracketed figures in goals and targets in column A and potential baselines eligible for comment during both peer review and SAPSTA? This is from Alfred, WCS. Really, when you look at those figures in brackets, some are even X, others are figures already. That is where we expect SAPSTA actually to give us guidance on those figures, if it is already stated whether it could remain as is or it needs to be reviewed. And then those that are X's, we expect that at the end of SAPSTA consultation that we shall have resolved that. But maybe, Basil, you have something you want to add to that?
Colleagues, can we respond to the first package of questions? That's from the second I'm going to read later. We can do these 2 rounds. If you have no more inputs on the first package, Francis, I will pass the floor to Sasha to respond very briefly, and then I will read the second package. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you,
I can give to Sasha.
Yeah, thank you, Francis. So first of all, on presentation itself, so the presentation will be available probably, if not today, tomorrow on the website of SAPSTA 24. As Ezekiel also mentioned, together is the record of one of 4 webinars we had since last week. So on indicators are many questions, while in the next parts of this webinar, we will cover indicators more in detail. So I would prefer to answer those questions related to indicators later on. In terms of the process, I like to draw attention of colleagues and those asking questions that the whole process for post-2020 was agreed by parties in decision 14/34, at the last COP14. And this decision clearly provides a mandate for negotiation of the draft Global Biodiversity Framework to the open-ended working group. So that's why the whole process, including what will be discussed at SBSTTA or at SBI, is following the COP decisions, first of all. But also only can reiterate that for those worrying about comments during SBSTTA and SBI, the bodies which are not negotiating the framework, can be done through contribution to the components of goals and targets, as well as already mentioned by co-chairs on the numerical values. And I think Francis just reiterated that SBSTTA will have an opportunity, and SBSTTA will provide an advice on numerical values, which are currently in most cases shown as X, but which will provide some indications in the pre-session document, which again, as a whole package for this SBSTTA 24 agenda item, will be issued in August and posted online as any other SBSTTA documents for review by SBSTTA. So thank you, Sekio.
Thank you very much, Sasha and co-chairs. I will continue with the questions. We're running out of time. I hope we can do it very quickly. Silvana Bustillo, will goals and targets be open for inputs from non-parties before the open-ended working group 3? I will let co-chairs to respond to know if it will be another notifications. Remember that notifications are open to all parties, to stakeholders, including civil society. Belat Quishtat, my question is related to clarify the example of comments, for example, in goal C, C2, trends in benefits for access and genetic resources share. Can explain how to measure it with number of previous informed consent and mutual agreed terms. Well, this is why the peer review is going to be very useful to be more precise on this type of questions. So I invite you to look for these documents and to send specific comments. This is part of the discussions that SBSTTA is going to help in how better to measure, and if it's feasible, because we should remember that parties are including elements, goals and targets, and then the challenge is to go to the reality to see how can we measure this. And this is the role of SBSTTA. Alfred de Geminis from WCS. Just to clarify, are bracket figures in goals and targets in column A and potential baselines eligible for comment during both peer review and SBSTTA? Yes, SBSTTA can provide advice on these figures, not to negotiate, but can provide advice. So this will be part of the discussions. Elena Kruzberg, questions relate to indicators and baselines. Are they all considered as global? Are there any target specific, which can be national or regional indicators? Thank you for the questions. Initially, negotiation will be on a global basis, but it will be very important. The more we can go into regional or national or local level, the better. So this is what I call a fractal situation. And we are talking about the same essence. The better we can provide information in our national reports, the more precise we can see progress in the implementation of the new framework. Then Alfred de Geminis, thank you, Francis, it's helpful. Okay, yes, and I see also a responses from Basil to Gadir, to Alfred, and to Silvana. Yes. With this, I believe we covered these two rounds. I will pass the floor very quickly to co-chairs and secretariat if they want to add something to my clarifications as well. And co-chairs?
Thank you. Not much to add, maybe to read out a response to Silvana about how civil society input into the open-ended working group 3 will take place. We're in formal negotiation process now, And our mandate is clear. We can accept direct input from Substa, SBI, the remaining thematics, and the open-ended working group. So stakeholders' input has to be provided via parties or participation at the open-ended working group. Francis?
I really don't have anything much to add there.
Sasha?
No, thanks. I think all was covered.
Thank you very much. Well, to know if I don't know if it's in the pipeline a feature notification for more feedback before Cali meeting, but I understand we first has to pass through thematic consultations to Substa 24 to SBI, and remember that the presentation of the update framework as it is so far by now would be in September. So to have a full understanding where we are, but the final official version 1.0 will be before the meeting in Cali. With this, I think we're going to a short 5 minutes break to stretch your legs. So see you in 5 minutes to continue with the following 2 segments. See you in 5 minutes. Hello again. Welcome back to the second part of our 4 webinar. Now we will continue with the overview of SBSTA 24 Agenda Item 3 documents. And for this session, I hand over to our colleagues, co-chairs, to present in more detail what do we have in the documents we're going to see in the process. Co-chairs, you have the floor.
Hello, can you hear me well? Okay. Good day, everyone. So let's jump into agenda item 3 document, and here you can see we have the pre-session document that are for review in our document. The main document, the chapeau that was talked by Ezekiel a bit earlier, will be available in August. What you have now is a document for peer review, and that will be reviewed. There is a number of supporting documents that we will be talking later. At the end of the presentation today, Sasha will describe the document on annotation. There is a document with the details on the indicators, and there is the document about the links between the SDG and our framework. And then finally, in August, we will be publishing the full text of the global biodiversity framework. So if we can go to the next slide, we can get into the details of the document. So precisely what you see in the pre-session document is table, and some of you have talked about column A, which present the updated language of goals and targets. And then the other columns to the left, components, monitoring elements, indicators, and information about the availability of baseline data that are for you to discuss and advise. Again, the list of documents is below. But perhaps you're probably more interested as we move to the next slide to see how we've made the change and what is the rationale behind. And then we'll show that to you in 2 steps. The first step is the structure of the target as you know them from the January draft 0 version. And on this, we are showing the direction we receive with regard to merging some elements. The first thing you ask us to do is to merge goal A, B, and C into a single goal. And under goal D, nature provides to collapse the sub goals together. You've also asked us on the tools and solutions side to merge target 17 and 20. So if we move to the next slide, you will see several things on that slide. First, ignore for a second the red marking. What you see on the goals is the new structure of the goals. You have the ecosystem, species, and genetic diversity, you got the nature contribution, benefit sharing. And then below that, you've asked us to add a new goals about means of implementation. So in addition to that, we felt it was a little bit difficult to jump from a 2050 goals to a 2030 action. And that a step was missed and a tool was missed in terms of being able to describe how we make progress and whether the structure and the actions were enabling reaching the targets. We're therefore suggesting that a set of milestones be introduced, and you see those are milestones related to the goals and related to 2030, and you see them there. In addition, you've asked us to add a new targets related to species, and you see that new target number 3 there, which is about species recovery and conservation, and you can see the exact language, full language in the table. That's a new target. Finally, in order of facilitating the flow of the information and the readers, we're proposing some reordering of targets on the tools and solutions side. They're the same targets, just reordered a little bit differently. You can see the first one being the 2 mainstreaming targets, that's the same. The third one is a sustainable consumption and responsible choice, which is a merge of the 2 targets. biosafety is there. And then we brought side by side incentive and subsidies together with resource mobilization and capacity building. It was making sense for us that those two be together. And then finally, 19 and 20 are the same information and participation of several groups. So now, if we can move to the next slide, providing a little bit more details about the milestone. As mentioned earlier, the role, the proposition is to have something that is able to measure and show the progress toward the goals and enable adjustment in 2030 if needed, and ensure we can evaluate them. The next slide will show some statistics on where we are in terms of performance indicators. As you can see there, on the goal side, we have 4 goals that translate into 14 components. And then those in turn turn to 56 monitoring elements. And currently, there is proposal for 44 indicators. On the target side, 20 targets, 68 components, 154 elements, 136 indicators. Please note that you cannot add up number of indicators across goals and targets. There is some indicators that can serve both. So you have about 150 individual indicators. So an advice we're going to need is this the right number? Is it too many? Is the notion of headline indicator something that is going to be useful? So keep in mind in your work that number of indicators and the notion that you may want to take some in, you want to take someone out, but that's a useful and important distinction. If we go to the following slide, we're going to get into a few examples, and just to illustrate, we choose to show you 1 goals and 2 targets. So you see the full language for goal A, and we'll just pick the first one. Area, connectivity, integrity of ecosystem, increase, brackets, supporting healthy, resilient population of species, while reducing the number of species that are threatened and maintaining genetic diversity. So you have the 3 aspects. We're trying to cover the 3 aspects into there. There is some milestone in between, and you can see that we can decompose that 1 goal into 6 components. One on the extent of natural ecosystem, 1 on integrity and connectivity, 1 on the prevention of extinction, 1 on increase the number of health of common species, 1 on genetic diversity, and then 1 on the priority of ecosystem. So just to illustrate, we're going to move to the next slide and focus on A3, which is on the prevention of extinction of species. And I'm going to turn to Sasha that will walk us through the 3 leftward column of this graph. Sasha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Basil. And thanks also for presenting the overall structure of the draft monitoring framework. Again, I like to reiterate that the document which is in front of you is just a draft for peer review. And the real pre-session document for review by SBSTTA will be ready in August based on results of this peer review process. So you can see in front of you 4 columns. 2 of them actually are the same as in the initial version of the monitoring framework you saw earlier as a supplement to the 0 draft. So 2 columns were added in this version. The first one, as Basil already presented, the components. And you can see from this example, as well as you will see from examples related to targets, because the structure for goals and targets of the monitoring framework is the same, that components are actually explaining in more details what is covered by particular goal or target. And of course, the language of goal or target will be built the way that all those elements of those components are there. But again, for the convenience and for better understanding. So we included those components which will speak to specific details of goals and targets. So we kept monitoring elements, and you will see that there are sometimes several monitoring elements related to a particular component. And those monitoring elements basically describing what we are supposed to measure to see the progress against goal or target. And you also will see that all formulations for monitoring elements are made in trends in some processes or trends in some status. So it's supposed to be more around status for goals and more a combination of status and processes for targets. Then, of course, you will see indicators, and as we had already a number of questions on indicators, so I need to say a few words about the principles, how those indicators were identified, but also to say right away that those indicators are, first of all, global indicators. As for the global biodiversity framework and helping to measure the progress at the global level. But we also will talk a bit more on levels related to national and probably regional levels when we will speak about another document, which is an information document on indicators, and I can illustrate how those components were reflected there. So indicators, again, were chosen first of all based on the principle whether those indicators are real, existing operational indicators. That means
Sasha, seems we cannot hear you. Maybe he had some connection problems.
can you hear me now, Sekir?
Now we do. Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, I was talking about the principles indicators were chosen at this particular moment of time. So first of all, as I mentioned, or maybe you didn't hear me at that point, that indicators were chosen based on existing indicators, operational indicators, with existing data and available data, with organization who actually measure those indicators and probably process and put together the data for the indicator, the existing methodology for indicator. And again, indicator has a certain history of use. It doesn't mean that in your review and that for the completion of the final press session document, some other type of indicators cannot be included, including indicators which probably are under development now, or even indicators which need to be developed in the future. So that will be, of course, up to parties at SBSTTA to make a decision about the balance of those different types of indicators and identify which of them really parties like to use or which of them need to be developed. And the information to inform this decision is provided further in the information document, which we'll consider later on. So then you can see the last column, which was added, and it was not in the previous version of monitoring table. This column provides information on data availability if we like to discuss a baseline. So what are really the periods of data availability for a particular indicator. Again, it doesn't identify specifically the date for baseline for this indicator, but it's supposed to inform parties in their deliberations which indicators they like to include or not. And of course, that may further inform those potential users who will be working with those indicators to see what is a period of data availability, and how regular a particular indicator is updated. So you also will see that there are many empty cells in terms of indicators, and that's definitely an invitation for you during the peer review process to bring to our attention other indicators. Again, first of all, existing one. But while doing so, I think you definitely need also to keep in mind what Basil said in one of previous slides. When the number of indicators is already pretty high, so you should definitely consider, first of all, whether those proposed indicators are relevant or not, and while proposing new indicators, being mindful of total numbers, making them actually also reasonable and implementable. And the last point on indicators, if you decide to provide new suggestion for an indicator, in this case, please provide as much information about this indicator as possible. Very much based on those elements included in the information document, because we will need whether this indicator is existing indicator which is already used and measured, whether you know where data is for this indicator, where you know if there was any kind of baseline for this particular indicator, whether this indicator can be disintegrated at national level or not. So all this information will be again very useful for us compiling the final monitoring framework draft, but also definitely for parties during the negotiation and during the process at SBSTTA. Thank you. Basil, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sasha. If we now will go to the other two examples, we just choose them not quasi randomly so that they fit in the purpose of illustration, and we pick one from the first block of addressing loss of biodiversity, and then target one, as you see, is about 50% of land and sea globally under spatial planning, addressing sea land use, retaining existing intact and wild area, and allowing to restore brackets percentage of degraded water, marine, and terrestrial. So just picking the first one, first component, increasing an area of terrestrial, freshwater, marine ecosystem under planning, monitoring elements is trends in area under planning for land, the same thing for coastal, and the same thing for marine, and an additional one under integrated water resource management. And you can see the indicators, and you can see the information that is relatively scarce in this case around baseline data availability. If we move to the following one, which is target 9, on support productivity, sustainability, resilience of biodiversity in agriculture and other managed ecosystem. And there's several components under that. We just choose sustainable management of forest, and the monitoring element is trends in the proportion of area of forest under sustainable practice. And then you can see the progress toward sustainable forest management using the SDG indicator 15.2.1, and the second one being the area forest under the FSC or PEFC certification scheme. So we try to describe what we're trying to do. Ezekiel, I think this completes my portion of the presentation, and it's back to you. Next slide.
Thank you very much to co-chair for presenting the examples and the Secretariat of how are we populating the information on goals and targets. This is part of the documents that are for peer review and will be the documents we're going to be using, attending the mandate we have on SBSTTA. So we are now in the 15 minutes questions and answers segment. So I invite attendees to write your questions in the chat so we can help to respond. I hope it is clear how we are building the necessary information. This is for preparation of documents. We're not negotiating, we're preparing documents for Substat 24 to help the process. Yolanda Teran, during the pandemic, different types of violence occur to IPLCs, to indigenous women and girls, and to our lands, territories, waters, and resources. Therefore, IPCLs were forced to take their own solutions to face this global health crisis. Post-2020 documents regarding to biodiversity goals, targets, components, elements, and indicators should take in consideration the frame of human rights and safeguards. Right to self-determination, territory consultations, free premium for consent, food security, and sovereignty, water security, the right of holistic health. Post-2020 documents should also include the rights of indigenous women, secure land tenure, secure of resources. Consider our old tradition. For us, it is important to have face-to-face meetings. We face several technical language challenges to participate in virtual meetings. We must remember how to have healthy relationship between men and Mother Earth, respecting the natural laws and all her being. So this is not a question, this is more a statement. Of course, part of the conditions and the mandate from COP to the process is inclusion and give voice to different stakeholders. We should take this in mind. Thank you, Yolanda. Gadir, yes, there's a response from Basil to Gadir. Dirk Newman, SNSB Munich. Judging from the elaboration of indicators, the input of biodiversity research and taxonomy is not readily recorded and largely stays invisible. Usually, these data provide the baseline, but don't necessarily contribute to data to increases, which are measured. How could visibility, contributions, and the capacity building that is done in this sector, especially under Article A, be improved? Okay, I think we need to bear in mind that these indicators is to see how post-2020 is being implemented. How can we measure progress on this matter? It's important. This is not to negotiate the convention, but to measure this. And being from, I used to be taxonomy in my former life. I understand the importance to continue documenting biodiversity, but we need to see how can we measure implementation of the goals and targets. Gadir, just to be completely clear, the numeric value in goals and targets be under review and advice for Substat? Yes. We understand, not for text negotiation? Yes. This process, however, will start in August. Is this understandably correct? In August. We are on the peer review phase of documents for Substat, and Substat will contribute as well as SBI on implementation and also feedback from the thematic consultations that are programmed and you already saw. Are there any more questions from the attendees? Alexander is responding to Gadir. Numerical suggest values will be included into precision document for consideration by Substat. Document will be available in August, but no other rounds or review before Substat meeting. Yes, what you mean by August is when we will have precision documents ready. We have the mandate to at least 6 weeks in advance to have all documents, and we are pretty sure that most documents will be ready even before. I think presentation by co-chairs was very clear on how documents, and the two examples, the examples we saw from goals and the two targets and components and how it's being populated. Joaquim Salzberg from Argentina. Ezekiel and Sasha, thank you. Yes. For clarification, what will be the nature of the monitoring framework after Substack? Will it feed the open good work, the third meeting discussions? Yes. Will be open for board the modification after open-ended? Yes, we should remember that the ultimate word is from the COP. So we are doing our best based on the amend goals and targets to provide information on the monitoring framework and indicators as they are now. Of course, we expect in Cali, it will be an improvement of the language, it will be negotiations on goals and targets, and then the final version will be sent to the COP. Of course, there is no time to make adjustments on indicators if needed, and after COP adopts the framework, it will be a next phase to make the necessary adjustments on the monitoring framework once the goals and targets are agreed by the COP. That's my understanding, but I let co-chairs to complement this response according to what they have in their mind. Are there more questions to have a whole package, or if I don't see anything else by now on the chat? So I invite you to quickly type, to use your keyboards before going to co-chairs. I see Amber Schultz. Are the indicators at least complete? No, I guess not. Or are there indicators list only those that has baseline data? I will let Secretariat to respond. So we have two versions. One is the integrated one, and another is a detailed document written by the World Conservation Monitoring Center, compiling all information we have. That's why it's so important that now under the peer review process, we can include potential indicators probably we might need, and part of the role of Substack will be to identify gaps on these indicators. Elena Krusberg, what will be the institutional framework for monitoring and indicators after Substack? How will integrate the national processes? That's a very good question. My understanding is that we're going to agree at the end of the day during the COP in China, the framework. And we're adopting a global framework. And it's also important that countries at national level made adjustments of national biodiversity strategies and action plans, and they implement and to adopt its own national monitoring systems to report through national reports. After the Geminis, with respect to large number of indicators, it is anticipated retiring or deletion of existing indicators that are superseded by new indicators are not regularly updated. We will discuss a substance. Yes, this should be part of the discussions, and I'm not sure how much is retired. Some indicators are time bounded, if this is what you mean, and to see what we have. It's been a long time work of biodiversity indicator partnerships are the usual core set of indicators and the flexibility for countries to adopt them. But we are doing our best to have a good system trying to respond to what parties being included in negotiations for goals and targets. With this, I give the floor back to co-chairs to respond to these questions. Please, co-chairs, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ezekiel. Very rich set of questions. I'll probably just touch on 4 points, adding to what you said. The first point by Yolanda is really related to target 20, which is around and you will see about the engagement and participation of indigenous people and local community and women and girls. And links to the notion of rights and engagement. So clearly, it's going to be very useful to have good advice on the right indicators for that. I think there is good support for those notions, the way we've written them in during the discussion that took place at Open-Ended Working Group 2. So I encourage you to have a good look and a sharp pencil when you're providing your input. So we're looking forward to that. Turk on science and taxonomy. Definitely, if you look at the means of implementation as well as target 19 on availability of information for decision making, and underlying and supporting all that is that body of knowledge and the need to have appropriate science available. So have a look at that, and looking forward to your comments. Third point, the point about from our colleagues from Argentina, Joaquin, on the relationship and what is the role of SBSTTA and whether the output of SBSTTA will be reviewed by open-ended working group. I think Ezekiel provided a good description of the various roles. What I would add to that is that the advice of SBSTTA is the advice of a scientific body. The COP and the open-ended working group are negotiating body. They will be taking on that scientific advice, but I doubt they will want to change the scientific advice. They will be factoring that in together with other consideration in formulating a consensus on the language. But you can see that there is a difference between the two, and that is something that I'm sure open-ended working group members are keeping in mind. Finally, from Elena Kreuzberg, the discussion about institutional arrangement for monitoring and acquiring data, very important. I would say two things about that, well, probably three. One, this is part of, this is an important part of the responsibility and transparency discussion that will take place also under SBI, that include the planning, the reporting, which is monitoring, and how we use that. The second point is I don't think the SBSTTA should feel limited by the current arrangement. If there is a need to make change to the current arrangement, I'm sure the open-ended working group and the COP will look at that. We've seen similar change happening in other conventions. And then third, it may be useful for the SBSTTA to send a signal to SBI and to the open-ended working group in terms of some advice on what they see as needed on this side. So in my view, that's a very useful question that Elena asked, and one I'm looking forward to the advice on from SBSTTA. So that's all for me. Francis, over to you.
Thank you, Coach, and thank you, SBSTTA Chair. I just want also to still add something on the role of SBSTTA here in providing the scientific guidance. And as you've just said, I think our understanding as co-chairs then would be that once we've got the scientific guidance from SBSTTA, we should be really able to make relatively fast progress at the open-ended working group. I think we need to really put trust in the outcomes of SBSTTA and make progress more towards actually moving fast with the development of the framework when we have the third meeting of the working group. So SBSTTA really is a very important link in this process. Then there was a question raised of how I think these indicators will be integrated at national level. And I think Shasha gave some very good information on the choice of those indicators when he was answering some questions. So really at the national level, one has to think of a number of things, but basically maybe two is whether those indicators can apply at national level, and then of course the capacity that exists to use them at national level. And so that is among the other things that Shasha pointed out. So when you're thinking of how these indicators will be translated at national level. And lastly, on indicators, the list is not complete. Yet we also should be mindful that having very many of them, the co-chair in one of the slides tried to show, having so many of them implies a number of things. One, the resource envelope, because on every indicator you need to collect data. So that means we widen the resource envelope of reporting, but also capacity to do that kind of work. So those are the things we also need to take on board when we're thinking about these indicators. Very many of them could be good, but the challenge would be whether actually they will all be used. So we shall need to have to think carefully and try to really come with those realistic ones that we think can help us move forward in terms of being used and where data and capacity also can be possible to come by. I think
Thank you, Francis. I think we're losing the very last part. I give the floor now to Secretariat. If you want to add something, Sasha.
Thank you, Siko. First of all, a little bit on the process, as there was a number of questions about August. So what we expect in August we will issue the full set of documents for SBSTTA as we usually do. As Seki also mentioned several times, that in principle we need to make all those documents available 6 weeks in advance of SBSTTA. We believe that we will be able to issue them earlier, so you will have at least a couple of months to look at those documents. And I will remind what is this package. It's a press session document itself. That's a document number 3, which will include the usual note by Executive Secretary and draft recommendations of SBSTTA. It will be document 3 addendum 1, which will include the entire draft monitoring framework. It will have 3 information documents, annotations to terms and concepts used in the language, information document on indicators, and information document on linkages between Global Biodiversity Framework and SDGs. And it also will include the background document, which is the entire updated framework as based on comments received in Rome and discussions in Rome. So that's actually a package will consist of 6 documents. So the draft monitoring framework will also include suggestions for numerical values of goals and targets. And it will be part of this document for consideration by SBSTTA. But there is no plan to have any further consultations as usual between the issuance of official documents of SBSTTA and SBSTTA itself. So those documents will be already issued just for your preparatory work for SBSTTA and will be discussed only at SBSTTA meeting itself. So monitoring framework will be definitely part of the Global Biodiversity Framework. In what format and way, that depends on parties and how parties will decide on it at COP. And of course, the draft monitoring framework will, as part of Global Biodiversity Framework, will follow all steps and all elements of the process for post-2020. Indicators are clearly not complete, as again, you may see a number of empty cells in the monitoring framework. But of course, it may still be not complete. And that's also will be partially the information for parties at SBSTTA discussion. Because then SBSTTA will also need to make decisions on components and monitoring elements, also based on information, if actually indicators for those components and elements are available or not, and whether parties still like to keep them in this case, or they like to, for example, develop indicators if they found that component and monitoring element are especially important. So the decomposition into national level, that's continue, of course, to be an important issue. We also know that uptake of global indicators by national processes, first of all, through your national reports, is not very high. So the many global indicators proposed before, including for Aichi targets, were not used widely, while actually in national reports, parties were provided, of course, a number of the national indicators. Then also, we need to keep in mind that to the extent possible, monitoring framework is based on indicators already in use by other processes as well. And first of all, SDG indicators. So when you open the draft document, you will see that there is actually an indication where the indicator is an SDG indicator. And the purpose, of course, is to use as much as possible existing process and reduce the burden of reporting. Thank you, Sekio. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Sasha. We're running out of time. I see a couple of questions, one's regarding grasslands and another regarding ABS. I see that Basil already respond to that. So that's why it's so important, this peer review process, so you can identify gaps to suggest indicators to fill this, and then this will be discussed during substat deliberations. Remember, this is not to negotiate. The peer review phase is to identify, suggest indicators, to have as much complete as possible our set of potential indicators for consideration in a late stage. Now let's move to the last segment of today's webinar on the presentation of information documents. And for this, I give the floor to Sasha to explain us how these information documents, one of them which is already published, and are being prepared. Thank you. Sasha.
Thank you, Sekio. So at this last portion of the webinar, I'd like to cover briefly three documents, which again in front of you. The first one is information document. You can find it under Substat 24 webpage among information documents. This one was not requested by the open-ended working group as a recommendation from the open-ended working group, but it is based on discussions in Rome. For many of you who attended the meeting in Rome, you may remember that participants during negotiation on draft goals and targets were asking many questions. What does particular terms mean, or how co-chairs in developing zero draft were using different concepts? So that's why co-chairs decided that it will be useful for facilitation of discussion at Substat to produce this document, which definitely is not the document which is articulating legal definitions, but it is a document which provides information how co-chairs were using some terms and some concepts while developing the updated language of goals and targets. So then again, this document is in front of you just to help you to navigate through the draft for peer review, as well as will help parties and all stakeholders to navigate through discussion during Substat 24. Next slide, please. So another information document is requested by open-ended working group 2 directly. If you look at the recommendation of the open-ended working group, paragraph 6, you will see that the executive secretary was requested to develop a document on linkages between SDGs and global biodiversity framework, and that this document should be available for Substat. So we developed this document in also close cooperation with co-chairs and with their contribution, and document is open for your peer review. You can provide comments, and we expect very much your comments. And document has a few key objectives. First of all, of course, the document is supposed to help to articulate how global biodiversity framework and implementation of biodiversity framework may contribute to SDGs and achieving goals and targets. And you will see that even this preliminary mapping shows that global biodiversity framework actually will contribute to all 17 SDGs. Of course, differently to different goals, but to really many targets. So another objective of this document was to help to understand better how global biodiversity framework may support further work on those SDG targets which have a 2020 deadline. So you know that approximately overall over 20 SDG targets, they have 2020 as a deadline, including a number of biodiversity related targets from goals 14, goal 15, and goal 6 and 2, and some others. So we clearly saying that those goals, those targets, SDG targets, they are not expiring. They were supposed to be delivered by 2020, many of them based on nature targets, but the work definitely to be continued. So the document provides some suggestions how GBF goals and targets may support continuation of work on those SDG targets. And also this document provides some information how SDG indicators, which already exist and which of course are measured at a national level by your statistical offices and actually reported to UN, can be used to support implementation and reporting on global biodiversity framework. So we hope that this document again will be useful during discussions at SBSTTA, but also will be useful in the further process demonstrating how the global biodiversity framework is seen within the global development agenda as one of the implementation tools, and clearly showing further the linkages between conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and development agenda. Next slide, please. And the last information document, which is also for your peer review, was directly requested by SBSTTA 23 and also by the second meeting of the open-ended working group, and is based on the previous version of this document. This is a document with details on indicators for global biodiversity framework. You may remember that the first version was issued for SBSTTA 23, and this document was kindly provided and developed by our colleagues from UNEP World Conservation Monitoring Center. And they also did a great job and put a lot of efforts to provide the updated version of it. Next slide, please. You will see that this information document consists of two parts. The one is a narrative, which is actually providing you with some better understanding what were criteria for selection of indicators and development of indicators. So it's also talking about different views on different indicators. It provides discussion on roles and linkages between indicators at global and national levels. So that's actually to respond to many of your questions you asked before. But it also has a special section which is discussing approaches to baselines and may inform further consideration towards identification of baseline. Next slide, please. But of course, the main part of this information document is a pretty long table. Of course, we have many monitoring elements in the framework as well as many indicators. So it's a pretty detailed table, which compared to very limited number of columns in the table of global monitoring framework provides way much more technical information on indicators. And that's where you can get information whether, for example, those indicators are already used by different processes, whether it's, for example, the measurement of Aichi targets through Global Biodiversity Outlook, or it's SDG indicators, or maybe it's indicators suggested by Biodiversity Indicators Partnership, or it's actually indicators which are already in use and measured by other multilateral environmental agreements and processes. You also will see some indications on linkages with national level, for example, through the information whether this particular global indicator can be disaggregated for national use, or maybe this indicator actually came from aggregation of national information. You also will see important information for the decision at SBSTA on whether you include indicator or you do not include indicator related to available baseline data and baseline information. And you also can see whether the indicator is already in use or it's still under development, and also some indication when you can expect this indicator being ready. And finally, also in indication and information whether we have any institution which actually do measurement of particular indicator or possess data for this indicator and is kind of a custodian of the indicator. So doing this review, of course, follows a template. And again, as I mentioned before, it will be very useful if you provide new indicator, not provide only the language of indicator, but try to provide all supplementary data, which again will help parties to make their final decision on inclusion or maybe further development of such an indicator. Thank you, Sergio. I stop here.
Thank you very much, Sasha. With this, we now go to the last session of questions and answers. I see that there are some, I open the floor for questions. There's a point raised by Joaquin Salzberg about if we foresee a moment which we translate the scientific advice of SBSTA into guidelines regarding monitoring process that parties will undertake. I think this is a very important question. Of course, so far in SBSTA 24, we will do our best to provide advice on based on update goals and targets. What do we know that exists or may be used? But then discussions on the final framework and the implementation will need further work to go to details. I think this is a combination also to be considered by SBI, but maybe later by the COP, and I believe further SBSTA meetings to provide advice to parties. Elena Kreuzberg, in the countries, usually different agency stakeholders are responsible for SDGs and biodiversity. What mechanisms would be proposed by CBD to link institutes and increase synergy between SDGs and GBIF? Well, that's why this specific request and the document is being prepared to see these linkages. And I believe that part of recommendations will be for parties to work together at national level to support both implementations of Agenda 2030 and Post-2020 biodiversity, global biodiversity framework. There's also a response from Basil here. And I might miss where we can find those documents and links, SDGs, GBIF, and so on. Of course, on the peer review phase, I think you got late into the seminar, but there's a set of documents that are on the peer review process that will turn into documents for SBSTA. And I invite my colleagues from the Secretariat to put once again the links where you can get access to these documents. Is of course in the SBSTA 24 page of the Secretariat, and there's a specific link to get documents for the peer review phase. Are there any more questions on this process with the last participation of Sasha explaining nature of information documents that will help SBSTTA 24 discussions? I think it's very clear now. We are ready to look for documents and to get into the peer review process. Thank you, Joyce. There are the links for documents to be accessed. Dirk Newman, SNSB Munich. If new elements are to be proposed, they have to be anchored on the existing targets. If they fit, new elements could be added on the level components, monitoring elements, or indicators. My guess is yes. Of course, Secretariat will receive all contributions in the peer review process and will compile them to choose those contributions that are relevant to the process, to have a revised version as an information document or as part of the addendum one, of course. And that will be the document to be revised by SBSTTA as such. Then we will open usual negotiations under SBSTTA to agree on the indicators and baselines for revised goals and targets. So it is yes. So I invite you to take a look, and if you have ideas of better indicators to be considered to fill gaps, they will be more than welcome. Are there any more questions? If it's not the case, I will have a final round of comments by co-chairs and secretariat, some closing remarks for this fourth and last webinar on briefings, in particular for agenda item 3 of SBSTTA 24 on post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So, co-chairs, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ezequiel, and thank you to all of you that have asked questions. This is very useful. This is helpful. We've been too many months with having direct contact with you due to the circumstance we know. So we're starting today a process, and we hope that we will be keeping that contact over time through electronic means and eventually face-to-face. We appreciate your flexibility in adapting to this process. I cannot guarantee you what the future will be. We may be changing and doing things differently again. What is important is that we remain true to our principle of inclusion and managing an open and transparent process. More specifically on what we're trying to do here with SBSTTA and a little bit later with SBI. This is a very important set of advice. You're providing us with the scientific advice, and this is SBSTTA is the official scientific advice to the COP and to the open-ended working group. So I just want to emphasize that important role and different role from a negotiation process. The third point I would like to leave with you is that you should look at the vision and what we're trying to accomplish and not be bound by the current administrative arrangements that are in the system now. If there's a need to make some change, if there is a need to adapt and our institution and make them different, this is something I'm sure the open-ended working group and the COP will be considering. So please do not feel bounded by administrative or bureaucracy as they are now. Feel bounded by the need to enable reaching the vision. So thank you again. Apologies for my terrible typing on answering the question, but I privilege speed over grammatical correctness. and wishing you well. So Francis, over to you for some final points. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you very much, Co-Chair, for those closing remarks. Our network has been a little bit off and on at some point, but before I say the closing remark on my side as well, I see a mention here by Elena that in the countries, usually different agencies, stakeholders are responsible for SDGs and biodiversity. What mechanisms will be proposed by CBD to link institutes and increase synergies between SDGs and GBF? Of course, we have continued to emphasize and continue to hold this meeting of the Band 2, which will still, we hope, come up with some way to address this problem, maybe at a global level. But at the national level, the way I see it is that one, first countries should really try their best to have biodiversity, or their NBSAP should be included in the national development plan. Because in most countries, you find that it is those agencies responsible for the NDPs that are also responsible for reporting on the SDGs. So if you can get biodiversity at that level, then you know that you'll be creating a direct link with biodiversity and the SDGs. But most importantly also, I think at the national level, then countries should be able to come in play, put in place really proper coordination mechanism. Which institution would best be better placed to bring all together these various MEAs on biodiversity, including, of course, the CBD itself. Which institution is best placed? Maybe you look at the mandate of the various institutions, see which one better stands out to bring all this. Because coordination, if it is not there at the national level, then things will continue to be in silos. So that is something perhaps that could be looked at the national level when we go to implementation. But I think at the global level, this Bantu and other efforts will try to really put in place this harmonization part. Now, having said that, I would like to thank you again for really giving us your time, for, always responding to our call positively. We know there's a lot to be done, even in this lockdown. Most of you are very busy people. So the time that you give to us, we continue to cherish, and we look forward to continue to working with you until this process comes to a conclusion, sometime maybe next year during COP15. So thank you so much, and stay safe.
Thank you very much, both co-chairs, Basil and Francis. Now I give the floor for final remarks to Sasha.
Thank you, Sergio. Again, to add to the question of Yelena and build on what Basil and Francis said in terms of linkages between SDGs and global biodiversity framework. So, of course, we also need to remember that CBD, it's not secretariat. CBD, it's 196 parties. And it's the same countries as those dealing with SDGs. So maybe with some minor exceptions. So that's, of course, need to be taken on board that to a great extent, it's up to countries to ensure that they do the internal coordination at national level, while, of course, international instruments can further provide, but provide support, while international instruments are also dependent on decisions of actually the same parties. But there are several instruments there. So first of all, of course, the biodiversity framework, it's not occasional or not just by chance that it has global in front of biodiversity framework. It's a framework for all, where everyone's supposed to find their place, their responsibility, and their role, including other international process, multilateral agreements. We also ensure, and co-chairs ensure, that the process is very inclusive and open, inviting all those participants to play a role in developing this framework. That means that we hope that at the end all of them, they will see their own part in this framework, and that will help them to deliver on it. Of course, there is also the process for consideration and approval of Global Biodiversity Framework after COP15 at General Assembly, the same as it was done for the strategic plan in 2010 and for Aichi targets. And that again will bring more of a global feeling for this program. As you can see, we are trying to use as much as possible the similar indicators with SDGs. So then actually reporting on SDGs will be at the same time reporting on Global Biodiversity Framework and vice versa. So that again can add to the linkages through reporting. So a few words on the next steps, as I also see some questions coming. So first of all, I like to remind that as for any other peer review process, all your comments, everything we receive from you will be published online. So you will see your own contribution as well as anybody else's contribution to this peer review process. One of those 4 webinars we did since last week, including today, one of them will be shortly posted on the website, CBD website, as well as a presentation. So you always can look at presentation again, or if you are interested really to hear for the second time, you can go for the recording of these webinars. So with that, thanks a lot for your time. Thanks a lot for your contribution. So we are looking forward to see your comments. We already received a number of them. So we also definitely encourage comments coming from parties, but of course also all other stakeholders. So that will be instrumental for us and very helpful for co-chairs to complete the work on those documents. Please work also with your partners, inform your partners about this peer review process, as we are interested in as wide contribution as possible. We will keep you updated in terms of any further developments with meetings, whether those meetings will happen online or physical meetings. So also please follow our notifications. And again, thanks a lot, and looking forward to continue working with you. And if you have any further questions, any need to clarify something or get additional information, please come to us, to the Secretariat. We will be happy to respond. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sasha and Secretariat team, for helping the preparation of all these documents and webinars. I also thank the co-chairs, Basil and Francis, and also Elizabeth Kim for supporting timekeeping and working behind the scenes with the presentations. I do thank to all of you, all participants, and your questions for enrich these discussions and helping us to prepare better documents for our meeting. Still a long way to go in terms of content, in terms of preparation for substance, but also the thematic consultations, SBI, and also important meetings around like the summit and the presentations on global biodiversity outlook, and all these before the meeting of Cali and after Cali, to have everything ready for the COP probably next May. So I do thank you very much. Please keep well and healthy. I hope we can meet in next subcommittee meeting. The idea is to hold it in next November. And I hope everything turns better globally in order to go to the new normality that we're going to be facing in the near future. Meanwhile, please keep well and healthy, and thank you very much to all, and wish you the best. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you again.
Goodbye, everyone. See you.